Story 1. They say the earth keeps secrets better than people. I never believed that until one late afternoon when I was standing knee-deep in it, with a shovel in my hand and the smell of rain mixing with something sour in the air. The cemetery was quiet, the way only old places can be, like the ground itself was listening. I was working alone that day, finishing a new grave before sunset, the clouds hanging low and heavy, waiting to spill. It was supposed to be routine. I'd done it plenty of times before. Mark the plot, measure the depth, start digging until the headstones around me blurred into one dull gray wall. Sometimes the silence there was comforting, like the hum of a fridge you forget is running. Other times, though, the quiet pressed too hard against my ears, and I'd start talking just to break it. That day, even the birds had gone somewhere else. It was only me, the wind, and the weight of damp soil sliding off my shovel. About 4 feet down, I started noticing something strange. The dirt wasn't the same dark brown it had been at the top. It looked wetter, greasier somehow. I figured it was just groundwater. Cemeteries have that problem when it rains too much, and the clay underneath can't hold it all. But this wasn't the usual clear seep. It was thick, dark, and smelled off. Not just like rot, something sharper, like chemicals or spoiled meat left in the sun. I told myself it was just old water draining from a nearby grave. Happens all the time. The ground settles and things mix. Nothing supernatural about it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing on something that didn't want to be disturbed. The air around me had turned dense, and the breeze that had been keeping me company just stopped. When I bent to scoop another patch of soil, I heard it. A faint sound, soft at first, like a bubble popping under mud. Then another, and another. By the third one, I froze. I tried convincing myself it was just air escaping from wet soil, but every instinct in me screamed to stop digging. The hole suddenly felt smaller, tighter, and then it started. From the wall of the grave just near my boot, a slow trickle began. It wasn't mud, it wasn't water either. It was this thin, blackish liquid, slick and shiny, oozing from a hairline crack in the soil. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. It was sweet in the worst way, like burnt sugar and rot mixed together. I scrambled back a bit, trying to figure out what I was looking at. The liquid thickened as it flowed, forming rivulets that slithered toward the bottom of the pit, soaking the ground in uneven patches. My head spun from the smell. I climbed halfway up the ladder I'd placed earlier, planning to grab my gloves and maybe call someone to take a look. But right as my foot hit the third rung, the entire side of the grave shifted. Not a collapse, more like a slow exhale. A long sigh came from below, low and wet, as if the ground itself had lungs. I stopped breathing. The trickle turned into a steady leak, running faster now, seeping from the soil like it was bleeding. I could see small bubbles forming and bursting near the edge. The sound they made wasn't loud, but they carried, a faint popping that seemed to echo up the walls. I don't know how long I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to jump out and run, but another part needed to understand. Maybe it was some kind of old coffin breaking apart, letting out gases. That's what I told myself. Gas. Just gas. But when one of the bubbles burst close enough for me to smell the air it released, I knew that wasn't it. It was too heavy, too chemical. Then something small surfaced in the corner of the hole, barely visible, like a clump of mud or a root fragment. It wobbled, floated up slightly, and then sank again, leaving behind a ripple in that dark liquid. I could feel my skin crawl under my shirt. I'd seen things shift before when the ground gave way, but this was different. It felt intentional, like something down there had just noticed me. The clouds finally broke. A few drops of rain fell, but instead of washing the smell away, the dampness made it worse. The whole graveyard seemed to sour. My shovel was still stuck upright in the soil beside the pit, and when I went to grab it, I swear I heard the faintest sucking sound, as if something beneath was tugging at the blade. I didn't test it twice. I climbed out fast, stumbling over the mound of dirt I'd already shoveled aside. My chest felt tight, my hands were shaking, and I couldn't get the smell off my tongue. I threw a tarp over the pit and packed up without even leveling the dirt like I was supposed to. By the time I reached the main gate, my supervisor was walking back from his truck. He asked if I'd finished the dig. I told him I'd almost hit groundwater and needed to leave it for the next day. He looked at the dark stains on my gloves and just nodded, told me it happens sometimes. But when he walked by the next morning to check the site, he came back pale and quiet. He didn't say what he saw, only that the ground had sunk a little overnight and that the smell was still there. I left that job a week later, never went back. Some nights when it rains heavily and the air gets thick and sour, I still remember the sound that came from under that soil. The one that didn't quite sound human, but not like anything else either. Could have been gases, I tell myself. It could have been old wood breaking down. Could have been anything. But deep down, I know what it felt like when the ground breathed back at me. And dirt shouldn't breathe. Story 2. When I think back on that day, the air itself feels heavy in my memory, like it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. I was about 8 or 9, and my grandmother had taken me to this old cemetery tucked behind a patch of trees outside town. She had this quiet hobby of making gravestone rubbings, pressing charcoal over paper to capture the names time was erasing. To me, it was just another of her weird little projects, and I never thought twice about following her there that morning. The place was nothing like the tidy cemeteries you see now. The ground was uneven, covered in soft moss and weeds that grew in crooked patterns around tilted headstones. Some of the graves had no markers at all, just sunken patches in the dirt that looked like the earth had exhaled and never quite caught its breath again. My grandmother set up near a large angel statue and told me to stay close, but I was already distracted by how quiet everything was. Even the wind seemed to avoid that place. After a while, boredom got the better of me, and I started wandering farther away. I remember kicking through leaves and pretending I was an explorer. The soil was soft, spongy under my shoes, and I could hear little hollow noises every time I stepped. I didn't think much of it. I just thought that's how old ground felt. That's when I saw something yellow sticking out from under a patch of dirt near a broken stone. It looked like one of those old worn-out pencils or maybe part of a toy. I bent down, brushed the dirt off, and picked it up. It was smooth, light, and oddly cold, even though the sun was out. I remember twirling it in my hand and thinking how strange it felt. Then I noticed there were more of them, scattered bits poking through the soil like the earth had spit them out. They were all the same strange yellow color. For a second, I thought maybe it was some kind of old wooden debris, maybe from the caskets that had rotted over time. But then my eyes followed the curve of one piece, and I froze. It wasn't wood. The more I looked, the more my stomach turned. A few feet away, half buried in the dirt, was something round. The sunlight hit it just right, catching the hollow sockets, and I realized I was staring into the empty face of a skull. My mind went blank. I didn't even drop the thing in my hand right away. I just stood there, holding what I now knew was a small arm bone. I don't remember screaming or calling out. I just remember backing away slowly, like something was about to crawl out of the hole. I kept thinking maybe I had stepped where I wasn't supposed to. The ground had started to sink in around that area, and I noticed fresh little piles of dirt like something had been digging. There were holes everywhere, small round tunnels cutting through the graves like veins. When I finally ran back to my grandmother, she could tell something was wrong. I told her there was something weird over by the far end of the cemetery, and she followed me with that cautious, careful walk of hers. She didn't say a word as she looked around, just scanned the ground in silence. Then she sighed, a deep, tired sound, and said it was probably the groundhogs again. Apparently, she'd seen it before. The old caskets, the wooden ones from the 1800s, were long gone, eaten away by moisture and time. But the groundhogs loved that soft, hollow dirt. They'd burrow into the old graves, dragging out whatever was left inside to make room for their tunnels. It wasn't the first time someone had found bones like that. I wanted to believe her explanation, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of that skull wouldn't leave my head, the way it looked almost placed, not random, like something had pulled it upward instead of pushing it out. And then there was the smell, faint but sharp, something earthy and sour that lingered on my clothes long after we left. For weeks I'd dream about that spot, In the dreams, the ground would move, like it was breathing. Sometimes I'd hear scratching underneath, soft but steady, and wake up thinking something was under my bed. My grandmother told me it was just my mind playing tricks, that I'd scared myself. Maybe she was right. Years later, when I was older, I went back there out of curiosity. The place was even more overgrown, the headstones half swallowed by weeds. I found the same angel statue, though its face had worn smooth. When I got close to where I thought I'd found the bone, the ground looked freshly disturbed again, the dirt a lighter shade than the rest. There were still burrow holes everywhere, but there was something else this time. Near one of the holes, I saw what looked like a piece of old fabric, gray and stiff, poking through the soil. It fluttered slightly, though there was no wind. I crouched down but didn't touch it. The hole beside it was dark, deeper than I expected. When I leaned a bit closer, I swear I heard something moving down there. Slow, scraping, like nails against wood. I told myself it was just another groundhog, same as before. I even laughed a little to prove I wasn't scared. But when I stood up to leave, I noticed something odd. Every bird in the area had gone silent. Not a single chirp, not even the sound of leaves shifting. It was like the air was holding its breath again. I didn't stay long after that. As I walked away, I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the dirt shifting or the fabric being pulled under. But it stayed still, perfectly still. Sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder how many times the earth has given up its secrets, only to cover them again when no one's watching. My grandmother always said the dead rest quietly, but I'm no longer so sure. Some places just don't forget. They breathe differently, and that cemetery, it's still breathing. Story 3. There's a kind of silence that only exists in cemeteries, the kind that presses down like thick air, like the world's holding its breath. That's what I always thought whenever I worked there. The nights weren't scary at first, just lonely. The only company I had was the faint rustle of grass, the hum of far-off insects, and the quiet names carved into stone. I used to joke that I'd gotten used to the stillness, until the summer of 2018 proved me wrong. I'd been working there for 3 years by then, doing maintenance and cleanup. It was simple work: mow, trim, pick up trash, make sure everything stayed neat for the families that visited. That summer, I volunteered for a few night shifts to earn some extra money. Most nights went smoothly. I'd bring a thermos of coffee, plug in my earbuds, and just zone out as I worked. But one night changed everything. It started with me feeling off. I remember standing near the older section where the stones leaned like tired shoulders. My head felt heavy, and the world tilted a bit when I tried to move. I thought maybe I hadn't eaten enough, or maybe the heat had caught up with me. I sat down on one of the benches to steady myself, but the dizziness only got worse. My skin felt clammy, my vision fuzzy around the edges. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to leave. I'd been late a few times already that month, and the supervisor had made it clear that another incident would cost me the job. So I told myself I'd just sit for a bit and shake it off. Then my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was a random notification, but when I looked, there was a message from an unknown number. It just said, "I see you." I remember staring at it for a full minute, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that it was a prank, maybe one of the guys from the day shift messing with me. But the longer I sat there, the heavier the silence became. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It felt like the whole place had gone still for me. Even the crickets had stopped. I looked around. Nothing. The moon was bright enough to light the rows of stones, casting long shadows across the path. Everything looked normal, but there was this prickling feeling under my skin, like being watched from just beyond the light. I tried calling out, half hoping it was someone I knew. My voice came out shaky. No answer. I waited. Nothing moved. After a few minutes, I told myself I was being paranoid. I forced myself to stand up, thinking maybe the dizziness had just made me overreact. I decided to finish sweeping the path and get out early. But as I turned, my phone buzzed again. This time the message was blank, just an empty bubble. I can't explain it, but something in me froze. My chest tightened, and my body felt like it knew something my brain didn't yet. I tried to convince myself it was a glitch, maybe some spam text or delayed message. But when I turned off the screen, the reflection caught something behind me. A shadow that didn't belong, not quite shaped like a person, but close enough to make my stomach twist. When I spun around, there was nothing. Just the same stones, the same trees, and that still, heavy quiet. That was when the temperature dropped. Not just cooler, cold. My breath came out in white mist, even though it was midsummer. I don't know why I didn't run then. Maybe I was trying to prove to myself that it was just my imagination. I took a few steps toward the gate, moving slower than I should have. Each step echoed louder than the last, like the air had thickened. Then I heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap. Like footsteps, but uneven, as if whoever or whatever it was didn't know how to walk right. It came from behind me, following at the same pace I was moving. When I stopped, it stopped. When I stepped forward again, it did too. That was the moment my brain finally caught up with the fear in my body. I didn't look back. I just started running. By the time I reached the gate, I was gasping so hard it hurt. I didn't stop until I got to my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. There was another text waiting. This one said, "Too late." That was the last straw. I drove home that night and didn't sleep. I kept thinking maybe someone had been watching me. Maybe some creep had been hiding around the grounds. I told the manager the next day that I wasn't feeling well and didn't return after that. A month later, I moved to another town. Here's the weird part. A few weeks after I quit, one of my old coworkers called to ask if I'd left my phone at work. Apparently, during cleanup, they found a shattered phone near the bench where I'd been sitting that night, but my phone was right in my pocket the whole time. I don't have an explanation for what happened. Maybe I was just sick and imagining things. Maybe the messages were some weird glitch. But sometimes when my phone buzzes late at night, I hesitate before checking, just in case it repeats those same words. I see you. Story 4. There are certain paths that feel wrong the moment you step on them, like walking into someone else's memory that you were never meant to see. That's the best way I can describe my first day working at the cemetery. The air felt heavy, like it was watching me make a mistake before I even knew I was making one. I'd just been hired for administrative work, mostly data entry, filing, and checking burial records. Nothing glamorous, but it paid well, and I thought it would be quiet and peaceful. The office was supposed to be near the back gate, but the GPS dropped me off at the main entrance, which led straight into the cemetery grounds. I figured I could just cut through. It looked like a straight walk, and I didn't want to be late on my first day. At first it was calm. The rows of stones were arranged neatly, almost comforting in how uniform they looked. There was this kind of stillness you don't get anywhere else, the kind that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. I remember thinking it was beautiful, somber, but beautiful. Then the path started curving, and I realized I'd gone off the main walkway without even noticing. The tombstones changed too. The newer polished granite ones gave way to older, uneven markers. Some looked hand-carved, with names that were half erased by time. The trees were denser here, the air colder. I could smell something faintly sweet, like candle wax or incense. That's when I saw them. At first I thought it was just a cluster of mausoleums, big elaborate ones, the kind built like miniature temples. But as I got closer, I noticed small objects around them, bowls, bottles, broken plates. One had melted wax pulled around the base, another had charred sticks arranged in a circle. In front of one, I could see a little clay pot with something still burning inside it. Tiny flickering flames dancing, even though the wind had picked up. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Maybe it was part of some cultural practice, I thought. People honor their loved ones in different ways, right? But there was something off about it. The fires were too fresh. Someone had been here recently, maybe still was. The weirdest part was the sound. It was faint, like someone whispering under their breath far away. I told myself it was the wind moving through the trees. It almost convinced me until it stopped suddenly, like someone had held their breath just to listen. I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't tell which way I came from anymore. The headstones all looked the same, and the path seemed narrower than before. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual for that area, but at that moment, it felt like the whole place had sealed itself off. I tried to walk faster, pretending I wasn't scared, but the more I moved, the stronger that wax and smoke smell became. My stomach tightened. Then, as I passed one of the larger structures, something made a soft clinking sound, like metal tapping stone. I glanced over and saw a chain swaying slightly in front of the doorway. There was no wind anymore. It was one of those moments where your brain can't decide what to feel, part fear, part disbelief. I just kept walking, trying not to look at anything else. I must have gone in circles for a few minutes before I finally saw a patch of sunlight ahead. The trees opened up to reveal a gravel path and a small building with a faded sign that said office. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of relief before. When I got inside, I tried to act normal. Though I was sweating through my shirt, the receptionist looked up and said something about me coming through the grounds and that no one walked that way. She said it with this awkward little smile, like she wanted to say more but decided not to. I asked her if there was another entrance, and she pointed to a paved road on the side. She told me that the path was old and most people avoided it. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. A few days later, one of the groundskeepers came into the office, and I mentioned I'd taken that route on my first day. He gave me this strange look, half amusement, half concern. Then he said, almost to himself, that the old section was where some families used to perform night rituals before the cemetery banned it. I didn't press for details, but he mentioned seeing lights out there sometimes, candles or fires, that would be gone by the time he reached them. After that, I made sure to come in through the side gate like everyone else. But sometimes, late in the day when the sun starts to dip, I can still smell that faint sweetness through the office window. It's not strong, just enough to remind me it's there. A few times when I've stayed late finishing paperwork, I've caught a dim orange flicker in the distance between the trees, like someone lighting a candle, then snuffing it out. I tell myself it's just kids sneaking in, or a caretaker doing rounds, but deep down, I can't shake the feeling that the path I took that first morning wasn't meant for me. And maybe, just maybe, whoever or whatever was tending those fires knew that too. Story 5. I've always had this habit of walking through old places when I need to clear my head. Some people find comfort in coffee shops or parks. For me, it's cemeteries. They're quiet, strangely calming, and full of forgotten stories. There's one not too far from my apartment, a really old one that looks like it came straight out of a black and white photo. The kind where the air feels thicker, heavier somehow. I used to go there every few weeks, especially on evenings when I couldn't sleep. That's how I noticed it, the crypt that didn't look like any other. Most graves there are simple stone slabs or tall crosses, but this one looked like something carved for a myth, not a person. It was made of white marble, veined with jagged black lines like cracks in ice. In front stood a statue of a woman. She looked like the Virgin Mary, but there was something off about her face. Peaceful, yes, but also distant. Her eyes were cast slightly downward, as if she was praying, and in her hands she held a heart. Not pressed to her chest, just held out in front of her, the way someone might hold a candle or an offering. I noticed the hole through the heart the first time I saw it, a small cylindrical gap, cleanly drilled, and inside was a golden triangle with an all-seeing eye engraved on each side. The wall behind the statue had a whole scene etched into gold. A pyramid, an eye, a hand reaching out from clouds, rays of light falling on a tiny earth. I don't know why, but it felt like the statue was watching me, even though her eyes were lowered. At first I thought it was just art. Weird, but still art. Then small things started happening whenever I passed that spot. The first was the sound. One evening I was walking by, and I heard this soft ringing, like wind chimes far away. But there was no wind. When I turned around, the cemetery was completely still. I looked at the crypt again, and for a second I could have sworn the triangle in the statue's hand was rotating, just slightly, like a pendulum swing. I laughed it off, telling myself it must have been a trick of light. But from that day on, I couldn't pass that grave without feeling watched. A week later, I brought my phone to take a picture. I don't know why, maybe to prove to myself it wasn't as strange as I remembered. The photo came out blurry, even though my camera focused fine on everything else. The statue's face was the worst part. It looked like her eyes weren't facing down anymore. It looked like she was looking right at me. I deleted it immediately. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to this faint whispering. It wasn't inside my apartment, but it was clear, close enough that I sat up. It sounded like someone humming. No words, just a soft, slow melody. I checked my phone and realized I still had the blurred photo in my trash folder. For some reason, the file name had changed. It was just a string of numbers before, but now it said open_I. That was enough for me. I deleted it again, emptied my trash, and tried to convince myself my phone had glitched, but I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I didn't go back to the cemetery for a while after that, not until months later, when curiosity got the better of me. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where it looks like the sun's given up. The place was almost empty. The marble crypt looked the same, quiet, clean, untouched. Except this time, there was something new. The heart in the statue's hands was cracked. A thin line ran from the top to the bottom, splitting right through the hole that held the triangle. The golden eye inside was missing. Something about that made my stomach twist. I kept staring, thinking maybe it had been removed for restoration or stolen. I took a few steps closer, and that's when I saw it. On the ground, half buried in dirt, was the triangle. It was dull, scratched up, but still heavy looking. And the strangest thing, it was warm. I didn't touch it, but I crouched close enough to see something on its side. Faint markings like fingerprints burned into the gold. I couldn't make them out clearly, but they looked human. The air around me felt suddenly different, like someone was standing right behind me. I froze. There wasn't a sound. No birds, no footsteps, nothing. Just this pressure in my ears, like when an elevator drops too fast. And then, out of nowhere, the same humming I'd heard that night started again. Only this time, it was definitely coming from the crypt. I don't even remember running out of there, but I did. I didn't stop until I got to the main road. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. When I finally looked back, the cemetery gates were just sitting open, and I swear I saw something faint and gold flicker near that crypt. Just once, before it went dark again. I told myself I'd never go back, and I haven't. But here's the thing. Every few weeks I find a small speck of gold dust on my windowsill. Just a grain or two, nothing more. I keep cleaning it off, but it always shows up again. I don't know if it's just my imagination or if something followed me home that day. All I know is I stopped listening to music at night, because sometimes when everything's quiet enough, I still hear that faint humming. The same tune, soft and steady, like it's waiting for me to return. Story 6. Working at a graveyard wasn't as bad as people thought. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts bouncing around your head. During my high school and early university years, it was my evening job. I trimmed grass, cleared leaves, and fixed broken flower pots. The place had this strange peace to it, like the air itself had been trained to whisper instead of speak. In the beginning, I used to get jumpy for no reason. Sometimes I'd swear I saw something move in the corner of my eye. A flicker of white, or the shadow of someone walking just behind a row of tombstones. But when I'd turn, nothing was there. Over time, that stopped bothering me. You get used to it, the same way you stop noticing a clock ticking after a while. It happened one late afternoon around sunset. I remember because the sky had that burnt orange look, and the shadows from the headstones stretched long and thin, like fingers pointing toward the woods at the edge of the property. My supervisor told me to clear up the grass pile before I clocked out, so I loaded it into a wheelbarrow and headed down the narrow path leading toward the back fence. It was the farthest, most isolated part of the grounds, where the trees formed a wall and the light always seemed weaker. I had my headphones in, listening to some random playlist. The sound of the shovel scraping against the ground mixed with the music, and I zoned out completely. The path down there was uneven, with roots poking through, so I had to push carefully to keep the wheelbarrow from tipping. Somewhere between songs, I felt something shift. It's hard to explain. It wasn't a sound at first, more like a sudden awareness, like when you think someone's watching you, but you don't know from where. I paused for a moment, one hand on the wheelbarrow handle, and scanned the line of trees ahead. Nothing moved. The place was still, not even the usual buzz of insects. I started walking again. Then I thought I heard it, crunching, soft, uneven steps in the leaves behind me. I turned quickly, yanking one headphone out. The path was empty, just the wheel marks in the dirt and the rows of stones in the distance. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or something small, so I kept moving. A few seconds later, I heard it again, this time closer. Not quick footsteps, slow ones, deliberate. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. I stopped completely and let the music go quiet. The silence pressed in, thick and uncomfortable. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then from somewhere off to my left, a single leaf crunched. Just one. It was enough. I turned sharply and called out, but my voice cracked halfway through. I didn't even finish the word. The sound just died out in the air, like the ground swallowed it. Still nothing moved. I pushed the wheelbarrow faster, not running but close to it. The closer I got to the fence, the darker it felt, like the trees were bending inward, cutting off the last bits of sunlight. I dumped the grass, turned to head back, and froze. There was a figure standing by the path. Not close, maybe 30 feet away, half hidden behind a monument. I couldn't make out the details, just the shape, still, watching. For a few seconds, I didn't even breathe. I blinked and the spot was empty, completely. I don't remember running, but I must have, because when I finally stopped, I was halfway back up the path, gasping for air. I looked behind me again. No one was there. I told one of the older groundskeepers about it later that week. He just laughed and said, "Happens to everyone at least once." Then he told me not to take music down near the fence line, said the quiet down there gets in your head. That stuck with me. I thought about it more than I should have. A few weeks later, I decided to test it. No headphones this time. I waited until the same time of day and walked that same path again. The woods looked normal, the air smelled like damp earth, and nothing felt off. I dumped the clippings, turned to leave, and right then, I heard the crunching again. Slow, even steps, same as before. But this time I didn't move. I just stood there trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It stopped when I looked up. Then faintly, too faintly to make sense of, I heard what sounded like whispering. Not words I could understand, just a low, breathy murmur right at the edge of hearing, like someone talking through a wall. I backed away slowly. When I reached the open part of the cemetery again, everything went quiet, completely normal. The next day I checked that part of the fence line with another worker, just to convince myself it was something explainable. We found deer tracks near the trees, so I tried to believe that was all it was. Maybe I'd imagined the whispering. Maybe my brain filled in the silence. Story 7. There's something weirdly peaceful about cemeteries at night. The air feels heavier, quieter, like even the wind doesn't want to disturb what's resting there. I wasn't trying to be spooky or anything. I just took a late walk after a long day and cut through the old part of the city cemetery to save time. The path curves behind the church and leads out to my street, and I'd done it a few times before. But that night, something felt off the second I stepped past the gate. The air smelled damp and metallic, like rain that never came, and the moonlight didn't seem to reach certain spots, no matter how clear the sky was. I tried to walk steady, pretending it was just another shortcut, but I caught sight of something near the row of crypts that made me stop. One of the older stone vaults, the kind families used to share generations ago, had a figure kneeling in front of it. He wasn't praying or talking, just still, like a statue in the wrong place. My first thought was that he was drunk or maybe grieving, the kind of scene you don't want to intrude on. But after a few seconds, I realized he hadn't moved at all. Not a shift, not a tremor. I remember standing there trying to convince myself to walk away, but I couldn't. Curiosity has that pull. It's like the more you tell yourself to leave, the stronger it grabs your neck. So I walked a little closer, maybe 20 feet away, and stopped behind a tree. The man's head was bowed. His hands were on his knees. No sound, no movement. The longer I watched, the more wrong it looked. I don't know how to explain it, but stillness can look unnatural sometimes, like the world is holding its breath for something. I stood there for what must have been 10 minutes, waiting for him to twitch, sigh, anything. Nothing. I started thinking maybe he passed out. Or worse. I was debating whether to go check or call someone when I saw something strange. There was a faint flicker of red near the base of the crypt. Like a reflection or maybe a candle's glow, except it didn't flicker like fire. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. My body reacted before my mind did. I just backed away, step by step, till I was out of sight. I didn't run. I just kept my distance but stayed nearby. I can't say why. Maybe it was fear mixed with curiosity. Maybe some stupid instinct to understand what I'd just seen. I waited from a bench not far off, behind some old willow trees. The guy never moved. Minutes turned into an hour, and the only thing that changed was how the shadows kept shifting around him, like they were bending slightly in his direction. At some point, I started to feel this low hum, not in the air, but in my chest, like standing too close to a power line. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, or maybe I was imagining it. The clock on my phone said I'd been sitting there for nearly 90 minutes when I finally saw him move. Slowly, he stood up, still facing the crypt. He didn't look around, didn't stumble or stretch, just stood there for a full minute, then walked away down the path opposite from me. No flashlight, no sound of shoes on gravel. Just gone. I stayed frozen for a while, half expecting him to come back. When he didn't, I decided to see what he'd been doing there. I don't know what I expected to find, maybe flowers, a candle, or some personal item. But as soon as I got close, that metallic smell hit me again, stronger this time. On the stone slab in front of the crypt were a few small objects laid neatly in a line. 2 syringes filled with a dark liquid, and a small ceramic bowl filled with something grayish, almost like ashes. There was also a thin trail of powder, red, like rust or dried blood, forming a circle around the base of the crypt. I stepped back immediately. The weirdest part? The ground around it was completely dry, though it had rained earlier that evening. Everything else in the cemetery was damp except that one patch, like it had been sheltered under something invisible. I left fast after that, didn't run, but walked with that tight feeling in your spine where you're trying not to look back, even though you feel something might be right behind you. When I got home, I told myself I'd imagine it all differently in the morning. But the next day, when I passed by the same spot, in daylight this time, there was nothing there. No needles, no bowl, no red powder. Just the old stone, unmarked except for one new thing I hadn't noticed before. A faint smear, almost like someone had pressed their palm against the crypt and dragged it down slowly. Could have been dirt, could have been someone playing around, but every time I think about how still that man was, how he didn't move for nearly 2 hours, I get that same hum in my chest again. Like whatever I saw wasn't finished yet. Maybe he was just a junkie doing something weird. Maybe it was some ritual thing. I don't know, but if you ever pass through a cemetery at night and see someone kneeling by one of those old vaults, do yourself a favor. Don't stop to look. Some things in those places aren't meant to be seen moving, and some that don't move at all might still be watching. Story 8. There's something about silence that can grow teeth. When I first moved into that small brick house in 1978, right beside Union Cemetery, I thought the quiet would be peaceful. The backyard ended at a crumbling brick wall, and on the other side were rows of leaning tombstones, half swallowed by weeds. From my bedroom window, I could see the top of the wall, just high enough to hide whatever lay beyond it. The cemetery had been abandoned for years. The grass had gone wild, the ground sank in odd places, and rainwater gathered in dips like shallow ponds. I told myself it was just history falling apart. Nothing more. But after a few months, the line between history and something else began to blur. It started small. I'd wake up at night to what sounded like footsteps crunching gravel. Slow, uneven steps. At first, I thought it was a stray dog or maybe one of the neighborhood kids sneaking around. But every time I went to the window, there was nothing. Just mist hanging low over the stones. One evening, I was out behind the house pulling weeds along the wall. The sun was almost gone, and the air had that heavy, damp feel before night fully sets in. I remember glancing at the cemetery side and noticing how the ground seemed to pulse faintly with light, like someone walking with a dim lantern. I thought it might be my reflection, or maybe a trick of the sun, but the light kept moving even after the sun dipped below the trees. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified, the wind scraping tree branches against the house, the faint whistle of air through the old windows. I rolled over, trying to ignore it, when I heard something new. A soft dragging sound, slow and steady. It came from outside near the wall. I got up and peeked through the blinds. The yard looked the same, except for the faint outline of something tall, darker than the night itself, standing near the edge of the wall. It wasn't moving, just standing there like it was facing the house. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again, and it was gone. The next morning I went outside, trying to convince myself it had been a shadow from the trees. But there were marks in the dirt near the wall, long, uneven scrapes, like something had dragged itself along the ground. I told myself it was probably just raccoons or maybe kids climbing over. Still, I started locking the windows and keeping the curtains drawn after dark. Weeks went by quietly. I almost forgot about it until one night, a storm rolled in. The rain came hard, slamming against the roof like handfuls of gravel. I was sitting on the couch when the power went out. The whole house dropped into silence except for the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Then beneath the thunder, I heard it again, the dragging. Only this time it was closer. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it toward the window, but before I could even lift it, there came a dull thud from outside, right against the brick wall. Another, then another. Slow, deliberate hits, like someone or something was testing the strength of it. I froze, barely breathing, until the noise stopped. I waited a few minutes before finally shining the flashlight through the window. Nothing, just sheets of rain. The next morning I went to check, thinking maybe part of the wall had fallen from the storm, but it was intact. No new cracks, no damage. Only a set of wet footprints leading away from the wall and disappearing halfway across my yard. That's when I decided to stop looking for explanations. Some things are better left unconfirmed. I never saw the figure again, but sometimes late at night, I'd hear faint scraping sounds, just for a moment or two. I'd lie still and wait, heart pounding, until the silence returned. Eventually, I moved away and I told myself it was just my imagination feeding on loneliness. But a few years later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the old house one afternoon. The cemetery had been cleaned up. Fresh grass, upright tombstones, everything neat and proper. I stopped by the edge of the road just long enough to look. There was a man there tending to the graves, probably a groundskeeper. He waved when he noticed me. I waved back, though something about him made me pause. He was standing in the same spot where I'd once seen that dark shape. I blinked, and for a split second, I swear he wasn't there at all. I drove away and didn't look back. Story 9. People always say silence is peaceful, but I've learned it can also press down on you like a heavy blanket you can't kick off. Our house sat right next to a small cemetery, separated only by a short, rusted fence and a patch of grass that never seemed to grow right. At first, it didn't bother me much. Cemeteries never scared me. I figured, if anything, they were the quietest neighbors you could ask for. I moved in with my parents when I was 19. They loved the house, an old two-story place with peeling white paint and creaky wooden floors. My dad joked that it had character. My mom didn't joke at all. She called it strange. She said the air inside always felt too cold, no matter how high she turned the heater. I laughed it off at first, but after a few months, I started to notice what she meant. The house had this weird way of breathing. You'd hear it at night, a soft shift in the walls like something exhaling. The pipes groaned, the doors moved slightly even when closed, and sometimes the hallway light would flicker, just once, and stop. Little things, all small enough to blame on age, weather, or my imagination. But the real weirdness began one evening around midnight. I had been up late studying and went downstairs to grab a drink. The living room light was on, even though everyone had gone to bed hours ago. When I stepped into the room, I felt this sharp drop in temperature. The air just changed, thick and still, like when you walk into a freezer. I stood there for a second, thinking maybe the AC had kicked on, but it hadn't. Then out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone walk down the hallway, just a faint, dark blur moving fast, like someone gliding past the wall. I froze. My first thought wasn't anything supernatural. I thought maybe my dad had gotten up. so I called out for him, but no one answered. I checked the hallway, the kitchen, even the front door. Nothing. When I went back upstairs, everyone was asleep. I remember lying in bed afterward, trying to convince myself it was a shadow, maybe from a car outside, but our street was a dead end. No one drove there that late. After that, the night started feeling different. The air in the house felt heavier, thicker somehow. I'd wake up randomly around 3 a.m., not from dreams, but from this feeling that someone had been standing near my bed. I never saw anyone, but it was like I could sense a presence, like the air had weight where it shouldn't. Sometimes I'd hear soft footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs. Once I even heard what sounded like quiet humming coming from the bathroom, like someone singing under their breath. I didn't tell my parents right away. They already thought the house had energy. A year before we moved in, they said the previous owners had the place cleansed. A priest came and prayed around every room, sprinkling water and salt. My parents thought it was just superstition, but I could tell even my dad didn't like being alone downstairs after dark. The worst part came one night in late September. It was raining hard and I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard the front door creak open. Not fully, just enough to make that sound wood makes when it rubs against the frame. Then faint footsteps, slow and careful, moving through the living room. I got up and leaned over the railing to look down. Nothing. Just the sound of dripping water from the roof. I was about to go back to my room when I noticed something odd. The light from the hallway lamp reflected off the floorboards, and for just a second, I swear I saw footprints. Wet ones. Bare feet, small, leading from the door toward the center of the room. I blinked, looked again, and they were gone. Completely dry. I went downstairs, heart racing, and checked the door. It was still locked. I stood there listening, but there was only silence. Except, I could feel it, that same cold breath of air. It lingered around me, then slipped away toward the hallway like something unseen had just passed by. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I told my mom about it, half expecting her to laugh, but she just went quiet. She said she'd been hearing whispers sometimes near the stairs, like someone calling her name softly. She hadn't mentioned it before because she didn't want to scare me. That was when she called the church again. They came a few days later, a few people from our local parish. They prayed around the house, sprinkled holy water, and walked through every room. I remember standing by the window, looking out toward the cemetery while they prayed. The rain had stopped, but the ground outside still glistened. And for a second, I could swear I saw someone standing near the fence. Not moving, not walking, just standing. It was too far to make out details, but the shape was there, dark against the light of the street lamp. When I blinked, it was gone. After that day, things quieted down. No footsteps, no cold air, no whispers, just silence again, the kind I thought I wanted. But even now, years later, when the night gets too still and the house settles with that slow, breathing sound, I still feel like something's waiting just outside, behind the fence, watching. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe silence remembers what it's heard before. Story 10. Some houses breathe differently. You can tell from the way the air hangs inside. Heavy, still, like it's listening. That's how it felt when I first moved into the old mansion my parents had bought in Poland. The place was massive, all creaking wood and dusty windows, sitting right next to a cemetery that stretched out like a sea of gray stones. Between us and that field of graves, there was just a thin, rusted metal fence covered in overgrown bushes. You wouldn't even notice it unless you walked close enough to see the shape of old crosses through the branches. There was also a gate, small, almost hidden, that led straight into the cemetery. It had a lock that no one but my grandfather had a key for. He kept it somewhere in his workshop, though I never saw him use it. Sometimes when I passed that side of the garden, I'd hear the fence rattling as if something light was brushing against it, like wind or maybe branches, though the trees were farther back. The house itself was older than anything I'd lived in before. You could hear it settling at night, the long sighs of wood expanding, and the occasional sharp pop that echoed through the halls. We lived on the top floor, which gave me the best view of the cemetery. At night, the tombstones looked like teeth rising from the earth, but on Halloween, everything changed. People would come with candles, thousands of them, turning the whole field into a glittering sheet of light. It was beautiful and eerie at the same time, like the ground itself was breathing fireflies. That first year, I remember sitting by the window late into the night just to watch them flicker. The candles swayed in the cold air, dancing every time the wind passed. But then I started noticing something strange. Not all the lights moved the same way. Some of them swayed in rhythm, like they were being carried by someone walking in circles. I thought maybe the wind was stronger in some parts, but the pattern didn't make sense. It was like someone was pacing back and forth between the graves. The next day, I asked my granddad if people stayed there all night. He said no, the gates were closed by midnight. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every Halloween after that, I'd find myself at that same window, watching the same flickering field. Then one year, I must have been 16, it was different. Around 1 a.m., after everyone had gone, I saw a single light still moving near the fence. It was small, like a candle flame, but it was weaving between the stones toward our side of the fence. I remember thinking it must be a trick of the reflection from the window, so I turned off the lamp beside me to check. The light was still there, moving closer. I went down the stairs quiet so I wouldn't wake anyone. The mansion at night was a maze of long shadows and cold air that smelled like damp wood. When I reached the back door that opened into the garden, I hesitated. I could hear the faint metallic creak of the gate moving, like something brushing against it. I stepped outside. The grass was wet, and the night was colder than usual. I could see the candlelight clearer now, flickering right behind the bushes. Then it stopped. The gate rattled softly once, like someone testing it from the other side. I don't know why I walked closer, maybe curiosity, maybe something else. The bushes scratched my arms as I pushed through, and that's when I noticed the keyhole in the metal gate. It was empty. My granddad's key wasn't there, obviously, but the gate was slightly open, just enough that I could see between the bars. On the other side, there was no candle, just darkness and rows of tombstones glowing faintly under the moonlight. I stood there for maybe a full minute, waiting for my eyes to adjust, when I heard the sound. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, crunching on gravel. I froze. It wasn't coming from far away either. It was close, maybe 10 meters from the fence. I wanted to tell myself it was a caretaker, but the sound didn't move in a straight line. It circled, pausing every few steps, like whoever it was didn't know where to go. The weirdest part was how it stopped the moment I exhaled. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise, but as I turned, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. A faint shimmer of light moving between the graves again, like that same candle. Except this time, it was higher up, about the height of a person's head. It wasn't bright enough to see any features, but I swear it looked like someone was holding it and watching me. I ran back to the house, locked the back door, and went straight upstairs. When I looked out the window again, the cemetery was pitch black, not a single light left. The next morning, I went to the garden to check the gate again. It was closed. The bushes looked undisturbed. When I mentioned it to my grandfather, he said I must have imagined it. He even took me to his workshop and showed me the old key hanging on a nail, where it always was. I didn't believe him, though. That night, I found dirt on the grass near the fence. Footprints, but not clear ones, more like smudges. The next few nights, I started hearing faint clinks again, like the sound of something metallic being brushed by fingers. It's been years since then, but even now I can still remember the way that small light moved, how deliberate it seemed, how it stopped the second I looked at it. Maybe it was a reflection, maybe my mind playing tricks in the dark. But sometimes I dream about that night, and in the dream I'm back at the window watching the lights flicker. And just before I wake up, one of them starts moving toward me again.